Hello everyone and welcome back to the YellowDog 3D Tips blog. Today's installment is all about driven keys in Maya. So what driven keys do is create an association between two pairs of attributes. So this can literally be any attribute in Maya. I've created this little animation as an example of how two attributes can be linked. So the X position of the yellow star is being used as the driver for the rotation of the blue star. It's quite a simple principle to get your head around, but once you understand it, you'll find yourself creating some really powerful tools. So let's just jump into Maya, open yourself a new scene, and just create a simple box primitive, and we're going to create a sphere as well. The sphere is going to be the controller for the box primitive, and we're going to set up some simple driven keys here. So I'm just going to make this a perfect cube by doing it 5 by 5 by 5, and we're going to control the rotation of this cube with the X position of the sphere. So going into the transform attributes of our cube, we're going to select the attribute that we want to drive, so that's the rotate Z of this cube. Now we're going to select our sphere and click load driver, and we're going to select the translate X value of the sphere to be able to control the rotate Z of the cube. So I'm just going to make sure that's definitely controlling the X axis. So I'm going to move my sphere into its initial position and click key. I'm going to move it into its final position, and before we click key again, we're going to do a rotate on the cube. So I'm just doing it anywhere, click key, and now when we move our sphere, you can see that the cube is rotating. And you don't have to just do this for one attribute, you can actually drive multiple attributes with the same driver. So I'm going to select the cube again and select the scale attributes of this cube and click key in the initial position. I'm going to move our sphere driver object to its end position, and I'm just going to scale the cube up at the end position and click key. So now as we move our sphere, you'll see that the cube is not only rotating, but it's scaling up in all dimensions at the same time. So just to further demonstrate, I'm going to select the translate Y of the sphere, and I'm going to select the translate X of the cube, and hit key in that initial position. Now I've just moved the sphere in the Y axis, and I'm going to move the cube in the negative X axis and hit key at that end position, and now you can see that the sphere driver object is now controlling multiple attributes on the cube. So I'm just going to open the clock scene which I've supplied with this tutorial, and in this scene we're going to make it so that the yellow circle is going to control the hands of the clock proportionally. So I've locked everything else off, so you literally can't select anything but the hour hand, the minute hand, and the time slider. And I've actually limited this time slider so it can only move in the X axis. That's found in the limit information in the transform attributes, and this is the kind of stuff you do when you're rigging so that you can't push a value too far. So I'll just run through that quickly. Actually, I'm going to create a sphere that can only move in the X axis, so to select it, go down to its limit information, and you want to copy, I've done this in the wrong order, you need to copy the current value to the minimum and max of any attribute you want to limit. So I've just done that for the limit Y. So now this sphere cannot move in the Y axis beyond that value of 1.55. I'll do that in the Z axis. I just did it in the wrong order again. So now I've just limited it off in the Z axis, so it can only move in this X axis, and we want to set a minimum value and a maximum value for the X axis so that it can't move too far. So I'll just move it to its first position, click limit X, now it can't go beyond that point, and I'll do that for the max as well in the max position. So I've just created a nice range of X axis motion which the sphere is limited to, and you can do this for the rotate and scale as well. This comes in really handy when you're rigging because you want to have a predefined minimum maximum value, especially if you're controlling multiple attributes. And I'll quickly show you how you make an object unselectable. So if you just go down to drawing overrides, click on enable overrides and change the object to a reference object, and you won't be able to select that object now no matter how much you try unless you go to the outliner. So I can easily select it there, and this just comes in really handy when you want to create labels in a scene, such as the time label I've created, without worrying that you're going to keep selecting it and wasting time. So to begin, I'm going to select the hour hand, and I'm going to go to the transform options and select the rotate Y and click set driven key, and we're going to then select our time slider, which is our little yellow circle. Selecting that now and clicking load driver, I can link my translate X to the rotate Y, go to the end position, and now I need to go into the attributes of our rotate Y, so I'll just open my outliner go to our hour hand, and the rotate Y I'm just going to put as -360, so it will have completed one 360-degree revolution by the end of the slider. So there we go. The x-axis is controlling one revolution of the hour hand. So now let's do our minute hand. So I'm just going to select that minute hand, go to the Y attribute and click set driven key, select our time slider again, click load driver and translate X, key it at the initial position, we're going to the end position, and now we need to rotate this 60 times 360 for the rotate Y. So I'm just going to calculate that really quickly. 360 times by 60 is 21,600. So that's going to be our rotate Y value. It's going to be a minus value because it will have completed that revolution by the end of it. So click key on that, and if we move the slider now, you'll see they are moving proportionally to each other. So just like a real clock, the minute hand is going to go around at 60 times the rate of the hour hand. And that was really simple to set up, and now we've got a fully working 3D clock. So I'll just do one more example in a new scene. I'm going to be controlling in this scene the texture of an object with the position of a piece of geometry. So I'm just going to create a sphere in the center of the scene, and make sure you've got your subdivision axis and height both set to 20 so you can follow along. I'm just going to zero my sphere out just so that it's in the center of the scene. I'm actually just going to lift it above the grid so it's just easier to see. And I'm going to go to the edit UVs and UV texture editor. So we're going to just sort out this UV so that the texture I've provided will fit on it perfectly. So with the sphere selected, go to create UVs and go to automatic mapping, and this will make sure that the texture I provided will fit perfectly onto the sphere. So I'm just going to select the sphere and click assign new material. I'm going to put a basic lambert on there, and I'm just going to click the little checker box next to the color attribute and go to file. And now I'm just going to locate our image sequence which I've provided. This is an animated texture of just a pupil dilating. So let's just select the first of the image sequence and open that, and click use image sequence and turn on textured mode so you can see the texture. I'm just going to rotate our sphere 90 degrees so we can see the texture front on. So here we go. You can see we've got a nicely textured sort of crude eyeball, and as we scroll through the timeline you'll see that it is animating. But this isn't what we want. We want to create a controller which is going to control the animation of that texture, so we have complete control over it. This would be useful sort of if you were creating a human rig or something like that. So to begin, we'll select our sphere, go to the texture tab and go into our image sequence properties and just delete out the expression for the image number. So that's going to make it so that when we scroll through the timeline it's not going to animate the texture. I'm going to create a new sphere which is going to be our control sphere, and I'm just going to set up the limit information just like we did earlier, so that we can only move it in the x-axis, and I've done it in the wrong order again. So there you go, I've limited the y and I'm going to just limit the z now, so we can only move it side to side in the x-axis. Just making sure that works. So we want to create a minimum and maximum bound, so that looks okay for the minimum. Actually, just looking at it, that's going to be the maximum value because it's in positive grid space. So I'm just going to select that as the max, so that's as far as it can move on the left. Now I'm just going to move it to the right and select our maximum value. So now we can only move it between these 2 points and we don't have to worry about it going anywhere else. So next we're just going to select our eye geometry, go into the texture tab and go to the image texture properties and just delete the expression out of the image number. And I'm just going to right click in this image number and click set driven key. Make sure frame extension is the attribute selected. Select our sphere driver and go to translate X and key that in its initial position. Move it to its other end of its bounds, which is its end position. I'm just going to select the eye again, go to the image sequence properties and go to 25, which is the end of the image sequence, and click key again. Now when we move our driver sphere, you'll see that it's animating the texture on the big sphere. So basically we've just created a really simple rig for controlling the dilation of this eye texture, and if you want to make it extra neat we can actually just lock off all the values except for the X translate, and this is just going to make it so that only the X-axis transformation handle is in colour and the rest are going to be greyed out. So I'll just quickly show you one more thing, which is adding custom attributes which can control driven keys. So I'm just going to select our eye geometry and go to modify and add attribute. and I'm going to put the long name as iDilate, and just make sure you've got your data type set to integer, and we're just going to set the minimum value to 1 and the maximum value to 25 because there's 25 frames of texture. And now you can see in the channel box we've got a new attribute called iDilate. Now to make this attribute control your texture, go into your materials and go to image number and just delete our road settings out of there and right click and click set driven key. Now we can just select the same sphere and click load driver and click the iDilate attribute which we've just created, and we're just going to key that on the first frame, and then we'll change our iDilate value to 25, which is the end of the image sequence. We just need to get into our material attributes again, so just right click material attributes and go to the texture tab and put the image number to 25 and hit key. And now when you change the value of the iDilate in the channel box, that will be controlling the texture directly, so you can either change it manually or press control, middle click and drag, and you can control it like that. So just one more example before the end. I'm just going to quickly show you a work in progress sort of robot thing I'm working on. As you can see, it doesn't have any arms or legs or anything really, but as you can see it's got aperture blades for the eyes, and I've got a custom attribute here which will control those aperture blades, and that is just using the exact same principles I've just been over. I've just created a little piece of geometry for the aperture blade. All the aperture blades are just rotating around one central anchor point in the center of the body. And this is why I love playing with driven keys, is because you can get super creative and create new tools and rigs for pretty much anything. So that's it for this week. I hope you've learnt something. Please join us again next month because we'll have more tips and tricks coming your way. Cheers.